This is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Andrew Heintzman of InvestEco Capital. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into early stage investing?
Yeah, sure. When I came out of university, I started my own company. It was actually in the media space, but I ran that for a while and eventually sold it off in the kind of late 90s and around 2000. And then I was really taken with the opportunities in sustainability. So I sort of had an insight, and it was from reading a variety of books, one called Ecology of Commerce and others of that type, that there was a big opportunity in sustainability in the way in directing capital to solving problems. So typically, environmentalism and capitalism are sort of seen to be at loggerheads, but I realized that actually you could reframe that relationship, and that capitalism and was a way of solving ecological problems. And so I kind of put that together with my experience in running companies and started to envision a fund that would invest in companies that were solving ecological problems. And so I kind of got pulled in a little bit through an environmental interest. And so for a number of years, we started doing that, and we invested in a variety of sectors and looking at trying to find companies that were solving ecological problems and supporting them through capital and through being involved in those companies. And then over a few years, effectively, we started to focus more and more on the food and agriculture sector as the best sector for us. It was the best for our experience and for the kind of capital we had, and we had a sort of natural affinity for it. So eventually, we just ended up focusing exclusively on food and agriculture.
So for startups in those spaces of food and agriculture, what do you look for to be a startup that you're interested in?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we look for a company that's growing quickly. We look for a company that's unique. And so that typically means a lot of our companies have kind of unique farming protocols. A lot of them were started by farmers. So they usually have a reasonably original approach to food production. So just for some examples, we have one company called Maple Hill Creamery that's the leading organic grass-fed dairy company in the U.S. We have another one called Vital Farms that's the leading pasture-raised egg company, and they really kind of created a new part of the egg market around pasture-raising hens. And so we look for something that's kind of unique, and then typically they have also their own supply chain, and that's part of what's unique and gives some defense in the marketplace. But it's also their mechanism to scale. Traditionally, food companies have scaled by having how scale is often done by like ever larger single farms or ever larger manufacturing facilities. But the kind of scale that we look at is a little different. So they tend to have a large number of small farms that are farming in this kind of unique way. So it has a lot to do with kind of the uniqueness of it. It also has to satisfy our fund mission, which is that each company supports health or sustainability. So it has to have a very clear kind of evidence that the company itself is making the world or consumers healthier or more sustainable. So those are, and then obviously when we get into due diligence, we ask all the other questions that a traditional venture capitalist would ask as well. So the kind of more commercial questions, we will ask those too.
So you're on the cutting edge of food and where it's going through agriculture. Where do you think the future of food lies? What are the trends going on there?
Yeah, well, there's clearly a trend around consumers paying attention to this question of health and sustainability. I mean, that's a very now strong and clear trend, and it's consistent across the Western world, North America and Europe, and I'm sure other parts of the world too, although I'm more familiar with those areas. So it's really driven by the consumer that's looking for options for their family that they believe are healthier, and then also that they believe are better for the planet. So I think those are two very clear trends, and they show up in a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, obviously, the move to organic food is an example. The move towards plant-based diets is an example, or vegan diets is an example. The move towards pasture raising or grass-fed, all these are sort of various examples of what I'm describing as an overarching theme in the food industry. So I think that is not only a clear trend, but it's one that will continue for many years. I think it's not going to go away. It's become, it's gone from something that was very small when we started to something that really is driving the whole food sector now.
I find some sectors in the food industry get a lot of attention from investors and other segments don't get so much, even though they're all in the health and sustainability space. There's non-dairy milks, there's kombucha, there's a lot of different food innovations going on out there. Which of the segments are getting the most interest from investors based on category growth rate, demand, or what have you? What do you think the top three are out there?
Yeah, I would say the top trend from my analysis is probably this kind of meat replacement, plant protein kind of trend. And obviously, you've seen a number of very well-financed companies and some major, both strategic and venture capital, moving into those sectors. And so that's one, I'd say, clear trend. I'd say another is the overarching influence of technology on food. I mean, that's true not of only of the food sector. Obviously, it's true across the economy, but it's got its own particular kind of influence in the food space. And I may mention four because, I mean, the other one is just, this is an offshoot of my first, I guess, but more generally, plant-based diets, I think, are becoming much more common, much more mainstream, and are driving all sorts of sort of subsidiary trends in the food space. But then, interestingly, also the kind of whole world of pasture raising. So within the parts of the food industry that are still focused on raising animals, I think there's a whole new focus on the way those animals are raised. And so pasture raising is one component of it, but the focus on things like antibiotics and the whole question of how I guess the fourth trend, I'll call it animal welfare, just to put a big kind of catchphrase on it. But each of these kinds of breaks off into a million subcomponents. It's a complicated space.
And how much do you think that's being driven by the fact that it's just so much more expensive to grow more cattle or raise more animals, and that the move to plant-based just relieves the burden of all of that versus the health nature of plant-based foods? What's the trade-off between those two? What's really driving this?
Yeah, great question, because I think it really is both of those things, and it's pretty hard to disentangle them. I think they're both very present. Like, I think that there is a strong economic argument for plant-based diets. They tend to be less expensive. And for food producers, they tend to be less expensive inputs, the plant-based inputs. So I think that is a factor. But I also think that the focus and attention on animal welfare also kind of intersects with health on some level too, because I think consumers understand that when they eat animal products from animals that are unhealthy, there's a kind of, it doesn't take a great leap of imagination for them to realize that has a knock-on impact to their health. So I think the two are really strongly present. It's probably 50-50. And by the way, there's other ones as well. So, I think the other one is, for example, just a climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, there's a big focus on animals and the way they're raised in relation to greenhouse gas emissions. And obviously, animal welfare tends to be have a heavy footprint in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Like all these things in food, there's a lot of things going on, and it's kind of hard to pull the different strands apart. They kind of interwoven.
Well, you mentioned also agriculture, food and agriculture. And so food is the meat replacement, the plant proteins, and then the agriculture seems to be the technologies that are coming up as well, like vertical farming and hydroponics and those type of things. What's your take on those?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting. I mean, to take vertical farming just for an example, I mean, it's a very promising potential, and I think it's captured a lot of people's imaginations. I think it's these things take a while to be kind of ready for prime time, and then when they become so, then they really scale. So in my experience, we're just on the edge of vertical farming being really commercially viable. And once it does, though, its ability to scale will be quite substantial. And I think there's other areas that I mean, the other one I find interesting, similar to vertical farming in a way, it's at the similar stages, like closed containment aquaculture, for example, where new technology is making that possible. And that really could change the game globally in terms of access to fish as a food source, and especially sustainably produced fish. So I think we may be close to a tipping point in some of these areas. I don't think we've quite hit it. In both those are getting close, but they're not quite there. But once they tip, it could be a really dramatic change.
What do you think the technology is that's holding back that tipping point, or what's the technology that would actually engage the tipping point? What's coming up that you think is going to turn the corner for it?
Yeah, like the interesting thing about food and agriculture is, in the end, the technology is a meaningful part of it, but it can only ever be part of it. So I actually, my answer will be, I don't think it's technology so much as kind of know-how and practice, almost like you're dealing with biological entities, and they don't they don't respond the way human technology, like in the way that the human world responds. They're constantly full of surprises. I mean, like say in closed containment aquaculture, you just have to do it enough times, and you have all sorts of challenges and bugs and problems, and you kind of work them out. And that in conjunction with the technology is what allows you to iterate and move through to make it viable. And I think vertical farming is in the same kind of place where probably we actually have technically the technology today to do it. We just haven't yet put it all together, and we haven't iterated enough times to have learned the lessons to consistently do it. And that's just a matter of time and practice, really. So I think inevitably these things will happen. And capital too. I mean, it's these projects tend to be capital intensive. And so they are hard to develop because people have to put the risk capital in to see these things and be willing to have a certain appetite for failure, quite frankly, because they tend not to work always initially. So that slows them down a little bit too. Anyway, I think so. I think the answer is not really only technology. It's also just capital investment, and it's time, and it's iterations, and it's achieving the human know-how to actually make it work consistently.
What do you think about using agriculture as an energy supply, like algae for growing oil and for corn being ethanol? What's your take on using agriculture for an energy source versus a food source?
Yeah, it's a really excellent question. My gut sense of it is it's not going to be as efficient as using it for food. Like there's kind of a step in efficiency in taking what's effectively an agricultural product and turning it into a food product and turning it into an energy product. Now, where I can see an application is in the waste products derived from food production. And I think already there are lots of examples of waste byproducts from agriculture being efficiently used for energy production. In that case, you're not taking the stream away from food. You're really just taking something that has zero value and giving the value. So my sense is that's kind of the first step. And the second generation biofuel producers are coming along, and they're pretty much commercial now. I mean, we know two companies that are, one that is absolutely commercial and building plants, and another very close to it. So I think we're getting to that point where we can really use the waste byproducts, and that's going to be inherently more efficient.
Well, great. Well, in the last few minutes we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'd say is I think what's exciting about food and agriculture, but also what's difficult, is it truly is a system. Like and it's a bit like energy in this respect. There's no kind of silver bullet. Like you can't just kind of instantly make things better. You have to kind of work to move the system in the right direction. In agriculture, the system includes the environment, includes the inputs, it includes the animals and the other, the communities too. That's another part of it. So I think you kind of have to think holistically. But what I'm encouraged by is the consumers are definitely paying attention to the food they eat, and I think that's where it all starts to go in the right direction. And I think it's a great time to be involved in the food industry.
Great. So what's the best way for the audience to get in touch with you?
Well, the best way is probably through our website, www.investeco.com. So that's investeco.com. There's a contact button there, and on our email would be info@investeco.com. And they're more than welcome to send in any ideas to us that way.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for joining us, and hope to have you back for a follow-up interview in the near future.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks very much for having me.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.